I watched the Third Kingdom burn from a cliff above the Ashenmere coast, and I knew every fire was a love letter I was never supposed to read. He wasn't conquering, he wasn't expanding borders. The Alpha King of the Iron Vast Dominion was tearing the world apart, village by village, stronghold by stronghold, searching for a dead woman's body, my body. The smoke rose in columns so thick they blotted the stars. I stood with salt wind in my hair and a hand pressed against the swell of my stomach where his children were growing. And I understood, with the kind of clarity that arrives only when it's too late, that I had made a catastrophic mistake. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night the bond ignited and everything that came after became inevitable. The Sovereignty Summit happened once every 3 years, a gathering of pack leaders, military commanders, and political envoys at the Thornfield Crossing, neutral ground carved into the granite pass between the northern and southern territories. Every major pack sent representatives. Every alliance was tested, renewed, or shattered under the guise of diplomacy and wine. I was nobody at that summit. Less than nobody. My name was Elowen Cray. I was 22, the last surviving wolf of the Grey Mist. A coastal pack destroyed in the territorial raid when I was 16. I'd spent 6 years drifting between settlements, trading the only skill I had, field healing, for food and shelter. I stitched wounds, set bones, mixed poultices from whatever grew in whatever soil I found myself standing on. The summit's medical pavilion needed extra hands. I was an extra hand. That was all I was supposed to be. The Iron Vast delegation arrived on the second morning, 40 wolves in black leather and iron-gray cloaks, moving through the crossing with the disciplined coordination of a military force that had never lost a campaign. At their center walked the Alpha King, Tavern Kor. I'd heard the name the way you hear thunder, distantly, with the understanding that it belonged to a force that could level you. Youngest Alpha King in Iron Vast history. Assumed the throne at 19 after his father's assassination. Held the largest territory on the continent through military brilliance and a reputation for ruthlessness that entered every room before he did. I didn't see him arrive. I was elbow deep in a supply crate, sorting dried yarrow from willow bark, when a voice behind me said, "The commander needs a field healer. Blade wound, left forearm. Pavilion 3. I grabbed my kit and went. Pavilion 3 was a command tent. I pushed through the flap and found a man seated on a campaign chair, his left sleeve rolled past the elbow, blood tracking down his forearm from a clean-cut sparring wound, not combat. His head was turned, speaking to an aide. I knelt beside his arm, hold still. I pressed a cloth against the wound and my fingers touched his skin. The world detonated, not visually, not audibly. From the inside, a current surged through the contact point and traveled through my nervous system like lightning through a copper rod. Every sense amplified, every nerve ending fired at once. I could smell cedar and iron, and beneath both, a scent my body recognized on a cellular level, though I'd never encountered it before. Primal, specific, undeniable. Mate bond. Every wolf knew the theory, the involuntary biological recognition of your fated partner, the one wolf whose essence matches yours at the molecular level. Rare, undeniable, and once acknowledged, a force that operates on a timeline faster than reason, faster than caution, faster than the architecture of self-preservation that women like me build to survive. I looked up. Tavern Kor was already looking down at me. He was not handsome the way I'd imagined powerful men to be. He was striking the way a scar is striking, demanding attention through the force of his presence rather than beauty. Sharp-boned face, deep-set hazel eyes, a jaw carved from the same granite as the crossing. Dark hair cut military short. His expression, which I would later learn was almost always controlled to the point of opacity, was, in that moment, completely unguarded. He felt it, too. I watched recognition fracture his composure in real time. The shock, the involuntary surrender of a body responding to a truth the mind hadn't authorized. His aide was still talking. Tavern didn't hear a word. Your name. A need, not a question. Elowen. Elowen Cray. Grey mist. What's left of it. He looked at the hand still pressed against his wound, my fingers against his forearm, the point of contact where everything had changed. "Don't let go," he said quietly. I didn't. For 3 days, the Sovereignty Summit continued around us while a force older than language built between us with no regard for timing or politics. Tavrin kept me close, with intention rather than ownership. He assigned me as his delegation's healer, which gave him proximity without announcing the bond publicly. We both understood that a fated bond between the Alpha King and a packless refugee healer was a detonation waiting to happen. We talked in stolen margins between sessions after midnight in the narrow space behind the medical pavilion where the firelight didn't reach. He was not what his reputation promised. The ruthless Alpha King listened when I spoke, asked questions about the Grey Mist with genuine grief for what I'd lost, and once, when I described the night of the raid, the fire, the screaming, my mother pushing me into the sea, he reached across the darkness and held my hand without saying a word. That silence told me more about him than any speech could have. On the second night behind the medical pavilion, talking became insufficient. What followed wasn't planned, it was gravitational. Two bodies responding to a bond that had already decided what the mind was still debating. I'd never felt less in control of my own choices, and I'd never wanted control less. On the third morning, I said, "Your council won't accept me." He was quiet for a moment. "My council advises, I decide. They'll see me as a liability. No pack, no bloodline. No political value. You're my fated mate, Elowin. That supersedes politics. Since when?" He looked at me. The hazel eyes caught the distant firelight, and I saw the first flash of what I would come to recognize as his defining quality. Not cruelty, not coldness, but a ferocious, almost terrifying certainty. Tavrin Coeur did not waver. Once he identified a truth, he locked onto it with the grip of a man who understood that hesitation kills. "Since now," he said. I believed him. "Would you have?" On the fourth morning, Councillor Halvid arrived. Halvid was the head of the Iron Vast Elder Council, a lean, silver-haired wolf in his 60s with the specific kind of intelligence that manifests not as wisdom, but as strategy. He'd served Tavrin's father, he'd survived the assassination. He'd steer the Dominion through the power transition with the practiced hand of a man who understood that the real throne is never the one you can see. He summoned me to his tent. Not Tavrin. Me. I went because refusing a councillor's summons, especially as a packless wolf on neutral ground, was a declaration of hostility I couldn't afford. He was seated behind a campaign desk, documents spread before him, reading spectacles perched on a narrow nose. He didn't look up when I entered. Elowin Cray. Grey Mist survivor, field healer, no formal training, no pack affiliation, no property, no political connections. He turned a page. 22 years old, unmated, unbonded. Until 4 days ago. I said nothing. He removed his spectacles. "You understand the position this creates. I understand the bond is real. The bond is irrelevant. What is relevant is that the Alpha King, a man responsible for 200,000 wolves, 14 territorial holdings, and 3 active military campaigns, is about to announce a fated bond with a woman who brings nothing to the alliance table." The words were engineered to wound. They succeeded, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. In the calculus of pack politics, I was a zero in every column that mattered. "The Vomir Confederacy has offered a marriage alliance," Halvid continued. "Alpha Rendon's daughter, Selene Hale. The union would secure our southern border, grant us access to Velmir's coastal trade routes, and neutralize the Graven Reach threat. A political marriage, a necessary one. And the fated bond?" He folded his spectacles with deliberate slowness. "Fated bonds can be managed, suppressed, redirected. The Alpha King's personal desires do not override the Dominion's survival. Have you told Tavrin this? The Alpha King will be informed of the Council's recommendation at the formal assembly tonight. You will not be present. Your travel provisions will be prepared by midday. A border escort will take you to the eastern settlements, where you will resume your previous life with a generous stipend for your cooperation. He said cooperation the way you'd say compliance, like a packless healer had ever had the luxury of distinguishing between them. I stood, and if I refuse, Halvid's expression didn't change. The Iron Vast Dominion is not a pack that handles refusal gently. I would encourage you to consider the difference between leaving with dignity and being removed without it. I left his tent with steady hands and a chest full of ice. The formal assembly was held that evening in the summit's great pavilion, a cavernous structure of timber and treated canvas, large enough to hold 200 wolves. Every delegation was present. I wasn't supposed to be there. Halvid had made that clear. But 6 years of surviving the aftermath of a destroyed pack teaches you that the most dangerous place to be is where you can't see what's happening. I stood in the back, behind the servants half hidden by a support column. Halvid addressed the assembly with the oiled fluency of a man who had delivered difficult news so many times it had become performance, polished, persuasive, designed to make every terrible decision feel inevitable. The Iron Vast Dominion is pleased to announce a formal marriage alliance with the Velmire Confederacy. Alpha Keen Tavrin Corps will bond with Selen Hale at the winter solstice, uniting our territories and securing lasting peace for the southern corridor. Applause. Murmurs of approval. Selene Hale sat in the front row, elegant, composed, copper-blonde hair pinned beneath a silver circlet. Beautiful in the way political brides are always beautiful, strategically, with every detail curated to project value. Tavrin sat on the Alpha's platform. His face was stone. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. He hadn't agreed to this. I could see it in every locked muscle. This announcement was Halvid's move, made publicly to force compliance. Because an Alpha who contradicts his council in front of allied delegations doesn't look weak, he looks unstable. And instability in this world is a death sentence. Tavrin's eyes swept the pavilion. Searching, he was looking for me. I felt it through the bond. A pull so physical it was almost gravitational. His gaze reached the back of the room, caught on the column. Found me. The look lasted less than a second. No one else would have caught it. But the bond had made me fluent in his micro-expressions, the language beneath the language of his rank. What I saw was rage. And beneath the rage, a desperate, furious apology. I turned and walked out into the cold mountain air, and I kept walking until only the wind remained. She found me at the tree line. The copper-blonde hair caught the torchlight as she approached, and I recognized the silver circlet before the face. Selen Hale. "You're the healer," she said, not unkindly. "I am." She studied me, not rivalry, not pity, the measured assessment of a woman calculating a situation she hadn't designed. He didn't look at me once during the announcement, not once. I'd been promised to a man who looked through me as though I were made of glass. She adjusted her circlet. "Whatever you are to him, it isn't something a contract can replicate." She walked away. And I realized Selen Hale wasn't my enemy. She was another piece on a board neither of us had built, pushed into position by the same hands that told me my existence was inconvenient. I pressed my back against a pine trunk and slid to the ground. Not crying. Wolves who survived what I survived don't cry at political betrayals. We catalog them, file them, add them to the architecture of how the world actually works. But the bond didn't catalog. It screamed. A tearing sensation in my chest, as though the invisible tether between us was being stretched past capacity, fibers snapping one by one. The pain wasn't metaphorical, it was biological. A fated bond resisting its own denial. I sat against that tree and made the decision that would define the next 2 years of my life and end 3 kingdoms. I decided to die. Not actually die, but convincingly enough that the bond would believe it. A fated bond can be severed 3 ways. Mutual rejection, requiring both parties to formally renounce the connection. Tavrin would never agree. Death. permanent severance when one partner's life force ceases, or perceived death. A gray area in the old texts, debated by scholars, rarely tested. If one partner's body enters a state so close to death that the bond cannot distinguish it from the real thing, the tether snaps. But the old texts disagreed on permanence. Some scholars argue that perceived death creates a dormant bond rather than a destroyed one, the connection still existing in the bloodline, sleeping, waiting to be reawakened by mutual consent and proximity. Others insisted the severance was absolute. No one had tested it enough to settle the debate. The risk was enormous. The death state had to fool a biological mechanism that had evolved over millennia. Too shallow, and the bond holds. Too deep, and you don't come back. I knew a compound that could do it. Night hollow root mixed with white hemlock in exact ratios. A healer's last resort for patients in unbearable pain, administered to slow the heart to mere cessation. I'd used it once on a dying wolf whose injuries were beyond repair. I'd watched his heartbeat fade to 1 pulse per minute, his body cool, his scent evaporate. For 40 minutes he was indistinguishable from dead. Then I'd administer the counteragent, and he gasped back to life. I could do this. Die for 40 minutes, long enough for the bond to register termination, then resurface in private, far from Tavrin and the political machinery that had decided I was expendable. The river. The Ashbourne River ran through the crossing, deep, cold, fast-moving, with a gorge section 2 miles downstream where the current turned violent. If I took the compound at the riverbank, collapsed into the water, and was swept downstream, no one would expect to recover a body. The river would explain the disappearance. The bond severance would confirm the death. I mixed the compound that night, measured the ratios 3 times, prepared the counteragent in a waterproof pouch strapped beneath my clothes. And I wrote a letter, not to Tavrin, to no one. A letter that existed only because some truths are too heavy to carry without writing down, and I needed my hands free for what came next. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because the love was going to kill me, and I wanted to choose which death. I burned the letter, watched the words disappear into ash. Then I walked to the river. The water was cold enough to steal my breath before the compound could. I took the mixture on the bank, felt it working within seconds. A slowing, a dimming, a gradual withdrawal of warmth from my extremities. I stepped into the current. The water took me with an indifference that felt almost merciful. The moment the bond severed is the thing I carry. It felt like an implosion. The tether between us snapped, and in the fraction of a second before the compound pulled me under, I felt Tavrin's response through the dying remnants of the connection. A howl. Not audible, transmitted through the bond itself. A sound of loss, so absolute, it had no edges, no beginning, no end. Just a man's soul recognizing that the other half of it had been torn away. Then, darkness. I woke on a gravel bank 6 miles downstream, coughing water, the counteragent's bitter taste on my tongue. My body had acted on the muscle memory I'd rehearsed, fingers finding the seal, bringing it to my lips, even as consciousness fled. My left shoulder was dislocated, 2 ribs cracked. A deep gash along my hip bled freely into the river gravel, a wound that would scar permanently. The gorge had tried to keep me, but the wolf body is harder to kill than the human one, and the current had thrown me clear at the last bend before the deep rapids. I was alive. The bond was gone. Where it had been. Nothing. A hollow space behind my sternum that echoed when I breathed, as though my chest had become a room with all the furniture removed. I lay on that gravel bank for an hour, wet, freezing, alone, and I felt the weight of what I'd done settle into my bones with the permanence of ink on skin. Some decisions can't be taken back. Not because they're irreversible, because even if you could reverse them, the person who made them no longer exists. She died on that riverbank too. What crawled out of the water was someone new, someone who had chosen survival over love and would spend the rest of her life wondering if she'd chosen wrong. I walked south. For 3 weeks, I moved through territories without stopping, trading healing work for meals, sleeping in barns and under bridges. I avoided packlands, avoided settlements large enough to carry news, avoided anything that might hold word of the Alpha King or the fated mate who had drowned in the Ashbourne River. I reached the Ashmere coast in late autumn. A fishing village called Salfallo, 40 humans, a handful of wolf-blooded residents who'd left pack life generations ago, and an elderly healer named Odessa who took one look at my hands and said, "You know medicine. I know enough. Then you'll stay." I stayed. Took a new name, Ren. Simple. Forgettable. I built a life that was small and quiet and safe, and I told myself it was enough. 6 weeks after arriving, I missed my cycle. Then the next one. Odessa confirmed what I already knew, her weathered hands gentle on my stomach, her old eyes carrying the understanding of a woman who has seen everything and judges nothing. Twins, she said. The compound, the river, the bond severance. None of it had mattered to the lives already forming inside me. They'd held on through the poison, through the drowning, through the death of the connection that created them. Stubborn, relentless, their father's children before they'd drawn breath. I put my hand on my stomach and felt, for the first time since the river, a presence in the hollow space. Not the bond itself, its echo, its consequence. Living proof that what Tavrin and I had created in 3 fevered days at a mountain crossing couldn't be severed by chemicals and cold water, no matter how convincingly I played dead. The twins were born in early spring, with a storm shaking the coastal windows and Odessa's steady hands guiding them into the world. A boy first. Dark-haired, furious at the indignity of arrival. He screamed with a voice that rattled glass jars on the medicine shelves. Then a girl. Quieter, watchful. She came out with her eyes open, unusual even for Wolfborn, and studied me with an intensity that made Odessa laugh. "That one's going to be trouble," she said. I named the boy Stellan, the girl Mira. They had his eyes, both of them. That hazel that caught light like faceted stone, green in shadow, gold in sun. Every time they looked at me, I saw their father, not as a ghost, as a genetic fact, an inheritance carried in their irises that I could never alter. I loved them with a ferocity that frightened me, a sharper love than stories describe, more desperate, the love of a woman who knows she has stolen her children from a father who would have cherished them and must now be both parents, both protections, both halves of a bond she destroyed. Some love demands war. I just never imagined the war would be against myself. The news reached Salfallo in fragments. A trader mentioned that Ironvast had mobilized its army, unusual for peacetime. No one knew why. Then a refugee family arrived, a mother with 3 children, exhausted, terrified. She told Odessa that Ironvast wolves had crossed the Velmir border without warning, without diplomatic protocols. They're searching every village, every settlement. They're looking for someone. A month later, the Velmir coast burned. The Alpha King, operating on intelligence that his fated mate's body had been carried downstream through Velmire territory, concluded the Velmire pack had intercepted her remains. He demanded surrender of the body. Denied. He interpreted the denial as war. The campaign lasted 11 days. Velmir's military was half the size of Ironvast's, and Tavrin fought with the savagery of a man who had lost the capacity to distinguish between warfare and mourning. The Velmir Alpha surrendered, and Tavrin's forces tore through the territory. Every grave, every stretch of riverbank. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. He moved to the Thornfield March. Same pattern, demand, refusal, invasion. Then the Graven Reach. A third kingdom set ablaze by the same grief. I stood on the cliff above the Ashmere coast, 18 months after the river, with 6-month-old twins sleeping in the cottage behind me, and watched the distant glow of the Graven Reach fires paint the horizon amber. My death hadn't freed either of us. It had converted the pain into a different currency. I was spending mine in guilt. He was spending his in fire. Would you have gone back, knowing that the man searching for your corpse would discover you'd been alive the entire time, watching him burn the world, choosing silence? I almost did. That night, I packed a bag, held my children and told myself Tavrin deserved to know they existed, that the lie had grown larger than my capacity to carry it. Then Stellan opened his eyes, looked up at me, and made a small, contented hum of recognition. He knew me. He was safe. He was loved. I unpacked the bag. It was Odessa who betrayed me. Not deliberately. The result was the same. A wounded traveler arrived, an Ironvast border scout separated from his patrol during the Graven Reach campaign, knife wound to the thigh. Odessa treated him in the clinic while I was gathering herbs along the coastal bluffs. The twins were in their cradles near the clinic window. Stellan was asleep. Mira was awake, watching the stranger with her wide, unblinking attention. The scout looked at the child, at her eyes, unmistakable in their color, their depth, their genetic signature. He looked at the dark hair, the bone structure, the particular set of the jaw. He didn't say anything to Odessa. He thanked her, paid in copper, and left. 2 weeks later, an Ironvast delegation arrived in Selfalo. 4 wolves in formal gray, led by a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and the bearing of a senior military officer. I was in the clinic when they entered the village square. Mira was in my arms, Stellan in his cradle. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Eloin. Odessa appeared in the doorway, her face gray. The scout. He must have reported, "I know, Odessa." She looked at me with guilt mixed with the terrible awareness that a kindness extended to a stranger had become the mechanism of destruction for someone she loved. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's not your fault." It wasn't. Every domino that had fallen since the river was a consequence of my choice. The wound was mine. Everything was mine. The delegation leader entered the clinic without knocking. She scanned the room, then her gaze landed on Mira. On those unmistakable eyes, she went still. "My name is Commander Vashka," the woman said. "I serve the Alpha King of the Ironvast Dominion." Mira chose that moment to squirm in my arms, reaching toward Vashka with the indiscriminate social enthusiasm that defined her personality. Vashka glanced at the outstretched hand and her composure fractured. Briefly, just at the edges. "He thinks you're dead," she said. "I know. He has torn apart every territory between here and the Thornfield border looking for your remains. I know that too." Vashka's gaze moved to Stellan's cradle. The boy was awake now, watching the stranger with his father's focused assessment. Silent, absorbing, cataloging. Vashka's jaw tightened. She registered the resemblance, not just the eyes, but the stillness. Teverin's temperament staring back at her from an infant's face. "He will come here. When I report, you understand that. How long do I have? 4 days? Maybe 3. I nodded. "Commander, the council engineered my removal. Halvid. The betrothal, the public humiliation, the threats. I was manipulated into disappearing." Vashka's military control thinned, and beneath it I glimpsed the woman who had watched her alpha destroy himself since the river and carried her own fury about the reasons. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her, Halvid's tent, the threats, the compound, the bond severance, the pregnancy. Mira grabbed fistfuls of my hair during the hardest part, the river, the howl, and I let her, because the small pain was easier to sit with than the large one. When I finished, Vashka was quiet for a full minute. Then she said, "Halvid is dead." The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. 8 months after the river, the Alpha King discovered that Halvid had blocked his search, issued travel orders removing you before the assembly, orchestrated the betrothal specifically to force your departure. Her voice was level, but her eyes were not. He executed Halvid personally, in the council chamber, and Selene fled the Dominion the same night. The betrothal was never formalized. He refused to proceed. A measured pause. He refused everything: food, sleep, counsel. The only thing he accepted was war. Every justification I'd used to stay hidden, that he'd moved on, that the marriage had proceeded, that my absence was a footnote, collapsed. He hadn't healed. He'd immolated. And I'd watched from a cliff and told myself it wasn't my responsibility. "I'll go to him," I said, "on my terms, as a woman walking through the front gate with her children." not as recovered cargo. Vashka steadied me, then nodded. 3 days' travel to the Blackstone Citadel. Don't report my identity in advance. Why? Because if Tavrin knows I'm alive before I'm standing in front of him, he'll tear apart the distance and I'll never get to explain. Recognition crossed her face, one soldier acknowledging another's tactical instinct. 3 days, not a minute more. The journey was the longest 3 days of my life. I carried Mira against my chest. Stellan rode on my back, his small hands gripping my collar, his gaze cataloging every new landscape with solemn attention. He absorbed the world rather than reacting to it, a quality I recognized with a pang as entirely his father's. Mira babbled, pointed at trees, at birds. She was verbal early, not words yet, but sounds that carried the cadence of conversation, as though narrating the journey in a language only she understood. I didn't sleep. Each night I sat outside the tent Vashka provided and stared at the northern sky and tried to prepare for what waited. There is no preparation for standing before the man you killed yourself to escape, carrying 2 children he doesn't know exist. There's only the walking toward it, step by step, knowing what waits might be fury or forgiveness or both. The Blackstone Citadel rose from the northern plateau like a clenched fist, dark stone, iron gates, watchtowers cutting the sky. It was larger than I'd imagined, and colder. Vashka led us through the outer gates, through the inner courtyard, past barracks and training grounds and a forge whose heat I felt from 30 paces. Wolves stared. I kept my eyes forward. We stopped at the great hall. Massive iron-banded doors, twice my height, carved with the iron vast crest. A wolf's head bisected by a vertical blade. He's inside, Vashka said. Council session. 40, 50 wolves. 50 wolves. An audience of 50 watching the dead mate return. Open the doors, I said. The doors opened. The great hall was built for intimidation. Vaulted ceilings, iron chandeliers, a central aisle of polished dark stone leading to an elevated platform. The galleries were full. A territorial dispute was in progress. A commander speaking from the floor, gesturing at a map. He stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. I stood in the entrance with Stellan on my back and Mira on my chest, and I looked past every wolf until I found the platform. Tavrin Kaur sat in the iron seat. The time since the river had consumed him from the inside while leaving the exterior mostly intact, the damage visible only if you knew where to look. Thinner. The sharp bones of his face, sharper, the shadows beneath his eyes cut deeper, his posture carrying the rigid tension of a man who has forgotten how to let his guard down because the last time he did, his world ended. His eyes found me across the length of the hall. I watched recognition arrive in waves. First confusion. The woman in the doorway was changed. Sun darkened, thinner, hair longer, body reshaped by childbirth, his brow furrowed. Then the confusion cracked. I saw the exact moment his mind reconciled what his eyes were showing him with what his grief had told him was impossible. The exact moment dead was overwritten by alive. His chest expanded with a breath so deep it looked involuntary. The gasp of a drowning man whose head has broken the surface. His lips formed my name. No sound came. 50 wolves watching their alpha king stare at a ghost. I walked forward, step by step down the central aisle, my children warm against my body, every eye tracking me with the stunned intensity of witnesses to a miracle they had no framework to process. The dead woman was walking toward the throne with 2 infants and a spine that refused to bend. I stopped at the base of the platform. I'm not dead. My voice held steady. I don't know how. I was never dead. I faked my death to sever the bond and escape a situation your council engineered to remove me. I've been alive on the Ashenmere coast since the river. These are your children. Stellan and Mira. They're 18 months old. The hall didn't breathe. Tavrin rose from the iron seat. Slowly, as though his body needed to negotiate each movement individually, he descended the platform. 1 step. 2. 3. Close enough to touch. He looked at Stellan, who peered over my shoulder with calm assessment. He looked at Mira, one small hand fisted in my shirt, studying him with unnerving infant focus. Then he looked at me, and I saw everything: rage, relief, love, betrayal. The accumulated wreckage of every fire and every sleepless night and every mile searched, compressed into an expression no language had ever needed a word for. "You were alive," he said. His voice was a ruin. "Yes. You let me believe, yes. The kingdoms, the wars, I know. You watched. I watched." A sound between a breath and a fracture. He raised one hand and pressed it against my cheek, his palm warm, his fingers trembling with the effort of touching me gently when everything inside him wanted to grip and never release. "I burned the world looking for you," he whispered. "I know. I'm sorry. I need more than sorry. I know that too." He dropped his hand, stepped back. The military discipline reasserted itself, enough to construct a temporary wall between the rawness and the 50 wolves witnessing it. "Clear the hall," he said. The hall cleared. The doors closed behind them with a sound like a seal placed on something that could never be reopened casually. We were alone. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was an excavation. He paced. I stood still. The children dozed against me, oblivious. "Halvid, you're telling me Halvid engineered everything. He threatened me directly, told me to leave with dignity or be removed without it. He announced the betrothal publicly to force your compliance and made sure I watched. Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I was a Packless healer standing against a council that had already decided. I was expendable. I had no allies, Tavrin, no family, no one to vouch for me. So you destroyed the bond. I severed it. To free us both from a situation neither of us could win, inside the rules your council controlled." He stopped pacing, turned. "Free. You call what I've been free?" "I executed a counselor. I haven't slept a full night since the river. My wolf has been feral, half-shifted, attacking my own sentries in grief episodes I can't remember afterward." His voice cracked. "That is what your freedom gave me. The guilt hit with full force." Hearing it from his mouth, quantified, itemized, laid out with a soldier's precision, was a different instrument of pain entirely. "I didn't know you'd refuse the marriage," I said. "I thought the political union would proceed and you'd move on. I thought I was removing an obstacle, not destroying you. You didn't give me the choice." "No, I didn't." Mira shifted against my chest. Tavrin's gaze dropped to her, to his daughter, a child he hadn't known existed an hour ago, and the fury in his expression stuttered, competed with a force it couldn't overpower. "Can I hold her?" And his voice, stripped of rank and rage, was simply a father's, uncertain, hopeful, terrified of the answer. I lifted Mira and placed her in his arms. She didn't cry. She looked up at him with her wide, steady gaze and placed her small hand against his jaw. He closed his eyes, his arms tightened, and a sound escaped him that I will carry until the day I actually die, a father's soul identifying its child for the first time and being undone by the recognition. Stellan made a noise from my back, small, indignant, excluded. Tavrin opened his eyes, looked at his son, then at me. "Both. Give me both." I unstrapped Stellan and placed him in Tavrin's other arm. The Alpha King of the Iron Vast Dominion stood in his empty great hall holding 2 children he'd never known and wept without sound. I stood apart. This fragment of time belonged to them, a father and his children separated by a lie, finding each other across the wreckage. He gave me the Luna Suite, connected to his chambers by a door he left unlocked but never opened, a statement and a question in a single architectural choice. Over the following days, truth emerged in layers. He told me about the campaigns with clinical detachment, as though narrating someone else's history. Economies shattered, alliances incinerated, territories destabilized, because one man's mourning had become geopolitical catastrophe. "I knew it was disproportionate," he said one evening, "the children asleep in the next room, the fire low. But I couldn't find a version of sanity that didn't include finding you." The wolf takes over. The man recedes, and the wolf only knows one directive: find the mate. That's not leadership, Tavrin. No, it's what happens when the bond breaks without closure. The search becomes the only thing keeping the wolf from turning inward and destroying the man entirely. I looked at him across the firelight. We both failed, I said. You let the council control the narrative. I let fear control my decisions. Both of us chose the worst possible response to a problem with better solutions. And now we have two children who need parents who aren't at war with each other or with themselves. He studied me. Is that all they need? The question was loaded. I heard what lived beneath it, the unspoken inquiry about the dormant bond, whether it could reawaken, whether I wanted it to. I don't know yet, I said. I need time. He nodded. Sat with the uncertainty the way a man sits with a wound he can't treat, aware, pained, unwilling to aggravate it. Take the time, he said. 1 month after my return, Tavrin called a formal assembly. He stood on the platform, didn't sit in the iron seat, stood in front of it. I waged wars this dominion did not need, he said. I burned 3 kingdoms in pursuit of a personal loss and used the Iron Vast military as an instrument of my grief. That was not leadership. I am issuing formal reparations to all 3 territories. The cost will be substantial. The Dominion bears it, because the Dominion's Alpha created the debt. Murmurs rippled through the tiers. An Alpha King publicly acknowledging error was unprecedented in Iron Vast history. Additionally, he said, and his gaze found mine, Eloin Cray is my fated mate. I am not announcing a Luna or declaring a political marriage. I am stating that this woman and our children belong to the Iron Vast Dominion, not as possessions but as family. He paused. Let every word reach every tier. The bond will reform only if she chooses it, freely, without political pressure, without council interference. Her choice, her timeline, her terms, starting from the front tier, Vashka first, the wolves knelt, the gradual building acknowledgement of a pack recognizing accountability over pride. Not every wolf knelt. Some watched with crossed arms, and I respected them for it, because skepticism after a pretty speech is healthier than blind faith, but enough knelt to change the room's gravity. Tavrin didn't watch them. He watched me. And I stood at the base of his platform with his children in my arms and felt, for the first time since the river, the frozen ground inside me shift. Not every crown is worth the cost, but his honesty was worth more than any title he could have offered. I made him wait 3 more months. We built instead of falling back. Through shared meals and co-parenting and late-night conversations that began with the children and wandered into territory neither of us had mapped, the twins accelerated everything. Stellan watched his father with the quiet intensity of a boy studying a blueprint. Mira grabbed fistfuls of Tavrin's hair with startling force, and he led her every time. The ruthless Alpha King sat on his study floor and built block towers with the concentrated focus of a military strategist, and the towers always fell, and Mira always laughed, and every time, I felt the frozen ground thaw another fraction. On a night in late winter, cool air through the open window, the twins finally asleep, I said, I'm ready. He looked at me from across the study. For what? The bond. I want to try. He stood, crossed the room, came to rest a breath away from me, with the restraint of a man approaching something precious that he has previously lost through insufficient care. You're sure? I'm sure, because I need you to know, if it reforms, I won't survive losing it again. There's no version of me that endures that twice. So if there's any doubt, Tavrin. I took his face in my hands. His jaw, his cheekbones, the sharp architecture of a face I'd memorized at a mountain crossing and carried to exile. I faked my own death rather than watch you marry someone else. That should tell you everything about the doubt. The faintest trace of a smile, the first I'd seen that reached his eyes. That's possibly the most alarming declaration of love I've ever received. You burned 3 kingdoms looking for my corpse. I think we're matched. He kissed me. Not urgently. with the slow, intentional gravity of a man who has decided that this time, every moment will be chosen rather than seized. The bond reformed at the point of contact. Not like the first time, not a detonation, not lightning. This time it arrived like sunrise, a gradual illumination, warmed, spreading through the hollow cavity behind my sternum, filling it with a connection more resilient than the original, deeper, tested, scarred in the same places we were and stronger for it. I felt him through the reformed bond, relief so vast it had no horizon, love so concentrated it was almost unbearable, and beneath both, a vow woven into every reconstituted fiber. Never again. I sent one back. I'm here. I'm staying. He was Alpha King by blood and war and the terrible cost of grief turned to fire. I became Luna not by ceremony, not by council decree, not by the politics that tried to erase me, but by walking back from the dead and choosing, with open eyes, the man and the life I'd once been willing to die to escape. Some women are given crowns. I crawled out of a river, raised 2 children on a fishing coast, and built mine from the wreckage of every wrong decision, his and mine both. That crown fits better than any title ever could. Here is what the river taught me, and the exile, and the fire, and the long walk home. Running from love doesn't kill it. It changes the currency of the pain. You trade heartbreak for guilt, closeness for distance, the agony of staying for the slow poison of wondering what would have happened if you had. Some bonds survive the worst of us. They survive because the 2 people on either end, for all their flaws and catastrophic decisions, were built to find their way back. But finding the way back is harder than never leaving. It requires honesty that has no armor and no exit strategy. It requires choosing, not once, not in a single dramatic moment, but every morning, quietly, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost. Tell me, if you'd been standing on that cliff, watching the fires, carrying his children and his name in your blood, would you have gone back? Or would you have kept walking? I think the answer says more about you than any story ever could. If this story stayed with you, if Alohan's choice pressed against something real inside your chest, you already know why you're here. Destined hurts is where love survives the worst things we do to it, and to each other. Subscribe. Stay close. Let the next story find you, the way the bond found its way back, not by force, but by choice.